Hello and welcome to the Money and Banking Law Podcast with Joe Sylvia, brought to you by Duane Morris, an international law firm with roughly 30 offices and 1,000 lawyers all over the world. I'm your host, Joe Sylvia. I'm a former Federal Reserve lawyer who represents banks, fintechs, and financial services clients on M&A, payments, and regulatory matters at Duane Morris. I'm also a core member of our banking, fintech, and digital assets and blockchain practices. Now, while we can't provide legal, financial, investment, or tax advice on the podcast, our goal for the Money and Banking Law podcast is to inform and educate our clients and friends on both the fundamental concepts and structure of the banking ecosystem, as well as critical developments in the law and regulation of money and banking. Thanks for joining us today. As always, if you have any questions from any of our podcast episodes, please reach out to me at jsylvia@duanemorris.com. On this episode, we're talking about large financial institutions and tokenized deposits. So recently we saw some press reports about largest institutions in the United States, namely JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, and others that are planning to launch a tokenized deposit network. The idea here is, I guess, at least in the press, to avoid the threat of the stable coins and potentially stablecoin issuance that may or may not happen in the future once we get fully loaded Genius Act compliant regulatory structure, which we're still probably a year away from in any event. But this is really interesting. So, stable coins under the Genius Act are they're the only Genius Act compliant stable coin is a payment stable coin. So very specific type of instrument and used for payment purposes only. There, of course, are other kinds of stable coins that are out there, but with respect to a Genius Act compliant stable coin, it's only going to be a payment stable coin. And there's a whole bunch of restrictions and operational requirements around reserves and so forth that are built into the Genius Act and built into the ongoing regulatory structure that's been proposed, not yet finalized. Anyway, what's really interesting, though, is this press report, or reports really, talk about these large institutions planning to launch a tokenized deposit network sometime in the first half of 2027. The network that I was reading about is going to be operated by the Clearinghouse, which is a real-time payment company that's co-owned by the same large financial institutions in the United States. The network will use traditional payment rails and connect it with the new evolution of digital asset infrastructure. What makes tokenized deposits interesting is from a portability payments perspective, they're essentially able to do the same thing as a stable coin can do from a payment perspective, but they don't come with some of the same restrictions and reserve requirements and restrictions around rehypothecation and so forth. So a tokenized deposit is just a digital representation of deposits. And so it's be thought of as kind of digital money, so you can transfer it almost instantaneously through the blockchain or distributed ledger architecture. It can be used in a way that moves and facilitates the movement of money at a much faster pace and on a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week basis. So what we've seen generally is that banks have been pushing against, or traditional financial institutions have been pushing against some of the newer players in the stablecoin and digital asset market, the cryptocurrency market, with the thought that stablecoins and the use of them are going to be competing with bank deposits. They're taking deposits away because they have to be supported with reserves and so forth. So there's the idea of a threat to the traditional banks. And this is also the reason why we've seen traditional banks and some of the bank trade groups push back on the Genius Act, push back on the regulatory implementation of the Genius Act, as well as the potential for a broader market structure bill, and things like being able to pay yield on stablecoin and things like that. That's for another episode. But today I just wanted to mention this really interesting development on developing a tokenized deposit network. Really a big step forward in a way to kind of allow tokenized deposits to settle instantly on a blockchain on this particular network, and around the clock, 24/7. As I mentioned, tokenized deposits are kind of a different angle to deal with the perceived threat of stablecoins. But unlike stablecoins, like I said, these are just traditional bank deposits that are represented as a digital token. So is that it's supposed to be, and it really operates as that simple. They have the same credit risk profile, regulatory treatment, and accounting standards as conventional deposits that would sit in a bank, but they keep funds within the banking system, as opposed to the idea that funds are leaving the traditional banking system because they are being put in reserves and otherwise for the stable coins. So the perceived threat of stable coins is mitigated to some degree by the use of these tokenized deposits. For example, I think I've mentioned this before, but JP Morgan already has kind of an internal coin that it uses called JPM coin. And it's really basically their own internal tokenized deposit system where they can move money from different accounts within their platform, which of course is the largest bank in the world, is a pretty large platform, but they can move money instantly 24/7 within their platform. This is just broadening that. The new clearinghouse network that's discussed in the press around this is going to basically allow that same concept and construct, but with respect to multiple banks across the United States. So really fascinating development, something that we've tried to talk with our existing bank clients and potential bank clients about is, whether or not the threat of the stable coins demands some action or not from traditional financial institutions. But I think with this, I think it's clear that the future of finance is moving in ways that is going to be, to some degree, some piece of it will at least be on-chain and tokenized. So this is just another movement down that road. So I would, again, expect to see more of these kinds of stories coming out in the next 3 to 6 months. I think especially going to be the case if we get market structure legislation. I was on a call this morning with and yesterday with the Digital Chamber. We're members of the Digital Chamber as a law firm. It's a great organization. Highly recommend anything that you can read that they put out from policy, regulatory, or otherwise perspective. They were talking about and hopeful that if we're going to get the market structure legislation, which they hope, of course, that would be in mid to late July, hopefully before the August recess. There's, I guess, a small chance that it could get passed after the August recess, but it's a pretty small window of time that might happen. Anyway, don't want to get too derailed there. But if we see the market structure legislation passed, wherein we get kind of clearer rules of the road, lines of demarcation between securities, commodities, and otherwise, then I think the pace at which you'll see development will just increase in velocity that much more, because now we're going to have some rules of the road with it. Anyway, that's all for today. If you have any questions about any of this information that I'm providing now, or any other podcasts that we've done in the past, please feel free to reach out to me at jsylvia@dwaynemorris.com. Please feel free to reach out to any one of your favorite Dwayne Morris lawyers. But for now, that's all from me. Please be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you do get your podcasts. Some are video, some are just audio. Either way, trying to provide some insight and useful information for the broader money and banking markets. And to the extent that you have anything that you'd like to add or question, like I said, reach out to me anytime. Otherwise, have a great day, have a great weekend, and I will talk to you soon.